Okay.
Hello, and welcome to this week's Qredible Live broadcast. As always, I'm here with our CEO and Chairman, Brian Fitzpatrick. And this week, we're very excited to have Joseph Hickey with us. Joe has spent decades working as an advocate for hemp farming in Kentucky and across America. In 1993, he discovered and revived the 1942 Kentucky Hemp Growers Cooperative Association. He organized America's first international hemp conference, and he was involved in drafting and passing Kentucky's first hemp legislation. He's a founding member of various nonprofits, including the Friends of Hemp, the Hemp Industries Association, the U.S. Standing Committee of Hemp Organizations, the Federation of International Hemp Organizations, and the Global Hemp Association Advisory Board. He's here with us today to discuss the past, present, and future of America's hemp industry. Thank you so much for being here with us today. It's clear you have a lot of interesting experience in the space. So to get us started, could you just dive in and tell us a bit more about your background?
Yeah. Well, where to start at? I guess I will start at right before the beginning. I was working in Belize, building roads and bridges, and the government changed on us, so we lost all our contracts, and I ended up leaving all my equipment down in Belize. But came back, and my dad had passed away a couple years earlier, but he was in the antique business, and he had collected these, a lot of things, but one of them was these newspapers that were bound up in book form every month. So, it was before they had computers. So that's how they kind of saved everything, I guess. So I'm reading through here, and this was like 1942. It was the Lexington paper, Lexington, Kentucky. And I'm just reading this stuff about Lindbergh flying, from mail. He was bringing mail from New York to Chicago to Atlanta to Miami and then down to Belize. And I was like, what's the heck? So anyway, but I'm reading all this history, and then I turn the page and it says F.G. Clay resigns from the Kentucky Hemp Growers Cooperative Association. And, being here in Kentucky, we've got the Kentucky Hemp Growers Cooperative Association, but it just hit me like a ton of bricks, because back in 92, hemp and marijuana were the same thing. I mean, in people's mind, there was no difference between hemp and marijuana. And so that kind of got me going. I was like, what the heck is going on? We have a history that we don't even know about here in Kentucky. Never even heard about, I mean, I knew that and heard, stories about hemp being grown, but not to the extent that this article was talking about, because F.G. Clay resigned at the behest of Roosevelt, and he went to Washington, D.C. to run the Hemp for Victory program. And I'm sure everybody's seen, the movie Hemp for Victory. So that was kind of the impetus for, it's like where they say you stick your toe in the water, next thing you're up to your ears in alligators. So I started collecting all this information and found out that France had been growing hemp for a while. And as a quick aside, the French had developed this low THC variety of hemp that they were growing there. So when the EU set the rules and regulations for the European nations, they insisted on having 0.3. That's where it originally came into, and it got, I forget, there was years ago, it got put in something else in some publication, but just, not as anything that really meant anything, because 0.3 doesn't mean anything. It's like looking at Kentucky and Tennessee. You can stand on one side of the line and the other side of the line, and I mean, it still looks like the same. It's still land. So the French set that arbitrary number and got it accepted into the EU rules and regulations because they had all the seed that was, so they had kind of cornered the market. Anyway, so I'd called France and talked to Monsieur Matou was his name. He was head of the hemp program there. And we had to have a translator because he spoke a little broken English, but not enough to really understand.
And he didn't speak Kentucky, right?
No, he didn't speak Kentucky. And so he turned me on to Ian Lowe in England, and so I got hold of Ian, and he was trying to get England to allow them to start growing hemp. And he told me about a guy in Canada, Joe Strobel, that was also, because they're part of in a roundabout way, part of the EU through their association with England. And so he was trying to get it allowed to be grown in Canada. And so now I'm collecting all this information. And then I found a bunch of old equipment in Paris, Kentucky. It was an old hemp processing facility. And they had like 4, those big file cabinets. He had 4 file cabinets full of correspondence between the Navy and them, all this and all these records about the farmers that were growing it. I mean, it was a treasure trove of information. And I was just, the more I got into it, I was just blown away that we didn't have that we'd lost all this history. And so after probably a year and a half, 2 years, we had started collecting this farrow hemp seed. And so we had all this, we had hemp seeds, we had all this information. I'd actually taken one of the scutching machines that are combing machines that work to the fiber. I reached underneath there and pulled out this big glob of old hemp fiber. And so I took it home and got a hammer on the back porch and beat it into a pulp and made paper out of it. And, why I did that, at the time I had no idea, but so in a year and a half later or so, and, there were so many fortuitous things that happened along the way that if I had, like, I turned the radio on and I never listened to the radio. And so it comes on, Governor Brereton Jones is having open door at 4. And anybody that wanted to go in and talk to the governor about anything, you go in, sign up and talk to him. So I told my wife, I said, well, let's go, we got all this information, she's going, you're crazy. Well, you're not going to go talk to the governor about hemp. And I went, yeah, why not? And so she capitulated and we went over, and when you sign in, they ask you what's your, why you're here. What do you want to talk to the governor about? And at the time, I sure wasn't going to say I'm here to talk to him about hemp. And so I said, well, I'm here to talk about the tobacco farmers are losing their income. I grew up all my life cutting tobacco, stripping tobacco, hanging tobacco, worked in tobacco all the time. So I had a affinity to really, and it had been involved in farming in one form or another all my life. So I told him that's what I was talking about. So when it came into the governor, he said, "What? We did the introduction and all that." And then he said, "Well, Joseph, what can I help you with today?" And I said, "Well, Governor, we're losing all these farmers are losing their income from tobacco because, the writing's on the wall. You see these heads of the tobacco company swearing under oath that nicotine's not addictive." And I said, I can see what's going to happen here. We're going to lose tobacco, and we've got to do something to start to help these farmers. And I said, you live on it was Ashford Stud Farm. It was a horse farm, but it was one of the largest hemp growing farms or plantations back in the 40s. And I said, that was what, you're living on a farm that has a big hemp history on it. And then so I started showing him all the information that I'd collected. And at the end, because I had photographs, I had all these. Clinton had signed this resolution that listed hemp as a national security, in times of whatever it was, but it was listed in there. And anyway, I showed him all this stuff, and then I don't know why, but I brought that paper that I'd made out of that hemp, and I said, Governor, I said, do you have a piece of paper? And he looked at us, yeah. And so he gave it to me, and I said, well, this hemp paper that I made right here, and I put it over and I tore it was equal parts, so I had two pieces exactly the same. And I said, do you have a match? And he was, yeah. And this wasn't rehearsed. I didn't even, it just came up, and he gave me a match. So I lit the regular paper up and
in the governor's office.
Right. Yeah. Right. Right on his desk. Back then he had an ashtray. You won't see ashtray on somebody's desk now. Right. So it left this like this gray, dark, big residue. And then so I lit the hemp paper up, and it just went poof, and there's this tiny little gray area, and you could see he just kind of looked at it and he looked at me and said, well, Joe, he said, if you were governor, what would you do with all this information? And I said, well, Governor, if it was me, I'd form a task force to see if what I'm telling you is true or not. And he said, well, Joe, I don't have any doubt that what you're telling me is true. And I said, well, it's not so much that, Governor. It's if you form a task force, it's just not you saying it. It's you have a group of people that studied it and everything. And he looked at me and he said, Joe, he said, I think you're exactly right. And he looked over at Jim, who was, and I can't remember his last name, but he was his ag guy. And so he said, I want you to work with Joe. He said, let's do this. Wow. So that was kind of what started, that really what got the ball rolling. And so I go back, we'd been collecting seeds for a year and a half, 2 years. And one of the farms that we collected off of was owned by Jake Graves, he had started Nashville City Bank, and he was the chairman of the board emeritus, and he had just retired. And Andy, his son, was working with us. Had actually, we collected hemp off his dad's farm, because their farm was a big hemp growing area. Mm-hmm. And so I just found, I had all this information and had the Kentucky hemp growers. And I told Andy and another guy, Dave Spalding, who worked for the University of Kentucky. He knew a lot of farmers because he was teaching farmers how to grow vegetables. And so I told him, I said, let's reincorporate the Kentucky Hemp Growers Cooperative and use that to inform all these farmers, educate the farmers on, the potential out here. And so I said, yeah. And I said, okay, well, Andy, you be the president of the association. I'll be the CEO. Dave can be the secretary and treasurer. And since your dad just retired, you think he would be wanting to could we get him to be like the chairman of the board? And so he said, well, let's talk to him. So we went and talked to his dad, and we started telling him about hemp. And he said, whoa, boys. He said, I know all about hemp. He said, let me show you something. So he showed us a picture of him as a 16-year-old boy weighing hemp up with one of the farm hands that they were weighing it up and everything. So he said, I know all about hemp. And we told him what we were going to do. And he said, sure. He said, I'll do it. So now we had credibility. And, he was a pillar of the community, belonged to the Fox and Hound Club. But that was what kind of really got us going. And one thing that happened that I think is kind of interesting, if you look back today, is he was good friends with, he was big in the Republican Party. He was good friends with Mitch McConnell. And so he said, well, I'm going to go talk to Mitch and see if I can get him to help. So he goes, and this was in 94. So he goes and meets with Mitch, and Mitch tells him, he said, look, Jake, he said, I can't even be seen with you. He said, because people are going to think that I'm trying to legalize marijuana. And it's kind of funny, now, what was it, 20 years later or 25 years later, he was the one that really, I think he'll be the one that will be remembered as, the main guy that really allowed him to be brought back.
Yeah,
So,
and it's fascinating because you're talking about an amazing history in this country of a very sustainable plant that has amazing uses, and it was used for many, many years before, and then all of a sudden it got demonized, and now it's all caught up in this even in the CBD world, this cannabinoid world, where people are confusing it. So, and I know that there's a Senate Bill 980, the Industrial Hemp Act of 2023, which was introduced. And, that bill, which has gone pretty much nowhere, it was introduced. It's really all about to expand the Agricultural Marketing Act of 1946 to exempt industrial hemp from certain requirements under the hemp production program, because we shouldn't be treating it like the cannabinoids. And you know what? You're the one, by the way, in Kentucky when I met you, that made all those bells and whistles and lights go off in my head. And it's like, wow, this thing is really mixed up in the wrong category, and it's holding us back. So, I mean, you talk a little bit about those challenges and what we need to do to really fix this so we can get on to the advancement of this as a pure, as a great use for the industry.
well, I think that's, there's two things that are really, I think, critical right now. And one is that people have to understand that hemp, and I'll call it industrial hemp. Industrial hemp is a completely different animal when it comes to the horticultural and agricultural aspects of it.
Yes.
Because when you're growing for the cannabinoids, and I don't care if it's THC or CBG or CBN or CBD, it doesn't make any difference. Cannabinoids are cannabinoids, and if you're growing for cannabinoids, you're growing as a horticultural crop. You're taking care of this plant. You're watching these plants, and if you're growing as an agricultural crop, you're growing acreage, large acreages of it, and so it's a different way of looking at it. And until the government, like I was just talking to a farmer the other day that he was growing for the Stanley brothers here in Kentucky. He was growing the CBD crop, but he was thinking about growing a fiber crop, and he's going, you know what? He said, I'm not going to do it. He said, I don't, as long as these regulatory situation is the way it is. He said, I'm not going to, I want to go out and plant it like I'm going to plant corn or soybeans. He said, I don't want to have to go and register and then go through all the steps. He said, if it's an agricultural crop, let's treat it like an agricultural crop.
Absolutely.
And, like when we met at the ASTM standards conference,
yep,
you had the marijuana people. I won't say marijuana, I'll say the cannabinoid.
Yes.
You had the cannabinoid folks that wanted to keep it's all cannabis is what they're saying, and it is
right.
But when you get to the 0.3 level, and I think that should be 1% and not 0.3 for obvious reasons, but if they had their way, we would stay regulated like the cannabinoids will be regulated or are regulated now.
Well, Joe, I was sort of in that camp because you and I met because we were sort of in a banking panel, and
Right.
I was saying, look, the bankers are looking at this as a high risk crop, and you don't understand how bankers work. And you looked at me and said, Brian, you don't understand the difference of what I'm talking about. Let's talk about it. And literally, we had this great conversation. I'm like, Joe, you're absolutely right. I mean, it was like this light show, and I'm like, it's like, you are absolutely right. We need to get this message out, and we need to get this confusion out of the way, because it shouldn't be that way.
Right.
Absolutely. This should be grown just like corn or anything. Well, it should be grown as an agricultural crop
Yeah.
that's that doesn't look at the cannabinoids. It's two different purposes.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and the other thing that uh, if you look at it, people talk about the economics of it, and it is economically viable to grow hemp for fiber or seed. But what I always say is, if you didn't make a penny off of growing industrial hemp, it would be worthwhile, because I was talking to a farmer, was he in Canada or where, but he was saying that when he followed a crop with after hemp, that they were getting like 10 to 20% increase in their yields because of the way it conditions the soil. And if you're following hemp with soybeans, hemp is not a host for a cyst nematode. So it clears the field of the cyst nematodes that attack soybeans, and they're getting, 10 to 20% increase in their yields.
Wow.
So if it didn't do anything else but give them another rotational crop to put, who was it? Thomas Jefferson said the best thing a man can do for his country is to add another crop into the rotation of the fields. And that's because the rotation is important. If you're a farmer, you know how important rotation is in a crop field. And so that's another, to me, a great reason to grow hemp. The other challenge I think that we have right now, Brian and Taylor, is that you can, if you were allowed to grow hemp without any regulations, if you were able to do that, and there was no issue, the problem that we have is creating this supply chain. Mm-hmm. There's no supply chain set up right now, and the supply chain has to start at the top. Farmers aren't going to grow it unless they have a place to sell it. The manufacturers, the decorticating facilities and everything, aren't going to spend millions of dollars to build a decorticating facility or processing facility, secondary processing facility, unless they know that they have the farmers that are going to grow it for them, and they have to know that they have Toyota or Apple or any of the big corporations guaranteed that they're going to buy it. And Apple or Ford or Toyota aren't going to do anything until they know that they have a 100% secured supply chain. The quality and the price is there. Once they have that, then they would buy it. But who's going to jump off the bridge first? Because nobody really knows how deep the water is here.
Yeah, absolutely. And for our listening audience, I think it's important to mention that there's several thousand uses of hemp fiber. In agricultural hemp. So hemp fibers are used in paper, carpeting, home furnishing, construction materials, insulation materials, auto parts. So when Joe's talking about Ford, you can make auto parts, out of hemp fiber, but he's absolutely right. And until we get a sustainable and predictable and transparent supply chain, who's going to take the risk on building with it if it's potentially going to shut down their production?
Well, and the other thing that people say, well, who's going to go first? Is the farmer going to grow it and have a bunch of it, and then wait for the processors to build a facility, and then wait for the CEOs to say, yeah, we'll buy it? Or where do we start at? And what my contention is, it has to start with the CEOs. Those guys have to come in, and I'm on the board of the Federation of International Hemp Organizations, FIHO, and you can go to fiho.org and look under pledge, and we've got an initiative called Evolve 2033. It's a 10-year initiative. And what the other thing, the reason we have this is because we want to set expectations, because if you went to Toyota and said, will you buy fiber, will you switch over? Sure. How much do you want for it? How much, when can you get it for me? I don't know. When nobody knows that. But if you go to Toyota and say, look, if you'll sign this futures contract, we'll call it, or a pledge or a commitment, whatever you want to call it. If you'll sign this and say, okay, when you have a supply chain, a guaranteed secure supply chain for me, when you can meet my prices within 5%, and when you can guarantee the quality, I'll buy it. And what that does for, let's say, Toyota, now Toyota can go out and go and, hey, we're here for Kentucky farmers. We're here to help support and rebuild our rural economies with our farmers. And it doesn't they have all this great PR that they can start as soon as they sign this commitment. They can go out and say, look, whenever you guys can meet my specs and pricing and guarantee me a supply chain, we're here. We're going to buy it. Then they can go out and start a PR campaign, and that campaign will go on until the farmers can provide them with the material and the guarantee that they're going to get it to them. And then even after that, they can continue that PR that says, we're great corporate citizens here. We're here to help out and help our local citizens build their economy back. So it's a win-win situation for them. And once they do that, I could go to the bank and say, Toyota has guaranteed they'll buy it. Here's what we can produce it for. Here's what we can sell it for. Here's the market price on it, and we've got $5 million. We need $5 million more. And then the bank's going, okay, well, if Toyota's going to do that, okay, then I can go out and get the farmers and say, look, here's some different seed varieties, grow these. And this is why it's a 5-year process, because you have to develop the seed varieties for that specific use, which is going to take 2 or 3 years. And but I think it'll be quicker because there's a lot of research going on seeds right now.
Yes.
But knowing that it's, say, 2 years for that, 2 years for building this equipment or building the decorticating facility, and then 2 years for R&D, and then ramping up, what we don't want to do, Brian and Taylor, we don't want to go down the same road as soybeans did. Soybeans came in the United States, I think, in the mid 1750s, 1760s. And it took 150 years for it to even become a commodity. And then it came almost 200 years before it became a full-scale commodity. And hemp's going to be legal, and it's going to be a commodity at some point. It might take 40 years, but if we do this in an organized way and everybody does their incremental steps over a 10-year period, we can speed this thing up. Short of that, we'll be 40 years before this becomes really a mainstream commodity.
I mean, the industrial hemp market was estimated in 2023 at 5.49 billion, and it's expected to grow at a compound annual growth rate of about 17.5% up to between 2024 and 2030. I mean, that is big in and of itself, but it could be 10 times bigger.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Well, and see, the other thing about hemp, besides all the uses for it, it can be grown in Canada, it can be grown in Florida, it can be grown up in Maine, it can be grown in California. It's one of those crops that's so versatile and with so many different climates that there's no other crop out there that even compares to the versatility and the range of applications and growing areas. There's just nobody else out there. There's no other crop that can do what hemp can do.
Yeah. Plus you're getting to use the whole plant, right? I mean, you're getting to use, the fiber, the seeds, the stalks, the herds, and even, I mean, the oils are used more for the cannabinoid side, but there's probably industrial use for that as well.
Well, the crushed oil, that's crushed seed, is the oil that I talk about.
Yeah.
We're not talking about oil from the flowers, because,
Right.
the other thing that people need to understand too is when you're growing for a fiber crop, you're harvesting that crop when the male plant flowers, because once it starts to pollinate, then the male plant starts to die and its fiber quality goes down. And once the female gets pollinated, she starts putting all her energy into the fiber part of it to strengthen it up so it can hold all the seed up. So the fiber quality in the female plant starts to go down because it's more of a tough, rough fiber.
Right.
So if you're growing it for a fiber crop, you're harvesting that thing as soon as the male plant pollinates, and there's never ever even an opportunity to even, they say, well, people will hide marijuana inside of a hemp field. That is so. I mean, well, the other thing, if I'm a farmer and I'm farming 1,500 acres, you think I'm going to go out there and plant an acre of marijuana and take a chance on losing my farm?
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
who am I going to sell it to? I mean,
Right.
you can go out and buy it anywhere. So, I mean, the whole thing is it's a red herring that
Yeah.
has stymied the industry for years. And, I hope we get over that with these new regulations that hopefully will pass.
Hopefully we will. We need getting Senate Bill 980 through and passed would be good at a federal level, and certainly the Farm Bill that's coming up that should be making a good distinction. We've got a lot of work to do to get there. You're doing amazing work, incredible work in the industry, and I could listen to you all day. Unfortunately, we are running out of time. But by the way, just as a quick aside, it was in a Kentucky hemp field that I learned to tell the difference, to actually identify the gender of the hemp plants. So it was a great Kentucky farmer that taught me a lot about the plant, and I learned a lot. They were previous, former tobacco growers, and it really helped me develop a heart for the American farmer and the Kentucky farmer. Good, solid folks, and working really, really hard, and a lot of them through the generations, and we need to do everything we can to preserve that legacy and the rich crop of hemp here in the U.S. So kudos to you, and we gotta have you back, because there's so much more to talk about here, and we've got to have you back as we follow the legislation, and hopefully it's heading in the right direction. What is the initiative? Where do you want people to go so they can find and join the effort here, or at least support the effort?
It's FIHO, FIHO.org.
FIHO.org.
It's Federation of International Hemp Organizations.org, and it's under pledge.
And you and I need to talk, because I have some interesting ideas that you may look at me like your wife did when you wanted to go to the governor and say you're crazy, but I'd love to talk to you about them.
Well, if we can get one company, whether it's Toyota, Apple, or Elon Musk is if we get one company to sign on to that will start the flood that will proceed. One of these major corporations signing that they are going to accept hemp if and when we can meet all their specifications. So to me, that's the next step that we have to take in order to really make this industry kickstart and take off, instead of languishing for another 40 years.
Absolutely. Joe, thank you so much for joining us on Qredible Live, and we are sure to have you back. In fact, I'd love to do a hour special about this very topic at some time in the very near future. So we'll be in touch on a couple different things.
Well,
All right.
thanks.